Hey everyone, James McBride here again. We're going to take a look at firewalls in detail. Now, we're not going to really get into it in a cybersecurity way. What I want to do is give you a little more information than what a normal person would have. Most people are familiar that firewalls keep us safe on our network. And that's alone, that is really, really helpful. But we're going to get into some details on what are the firewalls really doing. I think this is probably the most difficult unit. Uh, I don't know, but I think it is. But this is what we're going to go through. What is a network firewall? What is a software firewall? Because there's two different kinds. What rules are, our direction of traffic and how that matters with firewalls, how they defaultly behave, and what the home router is doing. And you can pause here if you would like to see what the learning objectives are. That's what we're going to be covering. Okay, so a network-based firewall is normally built into a router. Normally, so for big, large businesses, they may have a router, then a firewall, or a firewall, then a router. Depends on how they want to set that up. And it's out there on the network. So that's where we get the term network-based firewall. It's out there on the network. So in a big way, this definition comes from this definition. A software-based firewall is one that runs on your device. It's actually on your computer. And so you will look at how to mess with Defender's firewall in that video and how to add firewalling to a Mac, that video, which is the hands-on stuff, right? But that's not part of your little test. So software firewall, basically, that's part of the OS. It's part of your PC. It's part of your phone. It's part of whatever the device is. And then a network-based firewall is a hardware piece that sits out there someplace. It might actually be on a server, but normally it's part of the router there, especially in a home network, it's part of that router. So we call it, again, a wireless router, but it's really a wireless access point, switch, router, firewall, and it's doing all those things built in. Okay, so what does a firewall do? Well, it examines traffic that is coming in and going out, and it applies rules. So there's a set of rules that will be applied, and it's like having a flow chart as it comes down. Do I do this with the information? Do I do this with the information? It just kind of flows down through this, flow chart and applies those rules as it goes down through. So basically, the last rule usually is the one that you're going to make the most restrictive as it comes down through this. Now, at home, you don't have to do any of this because there is a default deny set up for anything coming in. Blocks everything until some rule allows it. So a default deny is the way your home-based firewall router is set up. Everything trying to come into your network is blocked. And I'll try to get an image here of, the attacks are non-stop. A lot of those attacks are actually stopped by your ISP because they know that that's dangerous, but there's always attacks. And basically what's happening out there is hackers take a big chunk of IP addresses and they scan that block. So from here to here, they scan hundreds of thousands, millions of addresses constantly to find somebody who does not have their firewall set up properly. So for those of you at home, there's really no setup you have to do. There really isn't, because you have this default deny. That little tiny router just ignores everything that's trying to get into your network. Just deny it all. The default allow means let's bring everything in unless we have a rule that blocks that specific thing. And this is not the default. So even though it's default allow, that's not really the way the industry works. It's kind of a concept that we need to understand, that you can set up this router to deny everything from the beginning and then allow certain things, or we can set it up from the beginning to allow everything and then deny certain things. So this one is pretty much not done, because what if you forget something, right? That's basically like saying, I'll just leave my door open, and then if I see somebody dangerous coming along, then I'll shut it and lock it. No, you just shut it and lock it. You may never have somebody dangerous come along, but that's a default deny. Okay, so inbound traffic means anything coming from the internet to you, and that's also called ingress. And then outbound traffic is anything leaving your network to go to the internet, and that's called egress. So inbound and outbound are the terms we're going to use. Anything coming into your network, inbound traffic, anything going out of your network, outbound traffic. See, now this gives us the ability to start setting up rules. Don't allow this coming in. Don't allow this going out. So we can start to set that up. One thing that can happen is you create something that's overly permissive. You allow too much access, which is weaker protection. And then, of course, you can be on the opposite side of that. So this really comes into you at work, especially if you've got your own business. You're going to have somebody set this up to apply the things that you need, like you may need to get into your system to access this database, that kind of thing. And so overly permissive means, well, we'll just open up a bunch of these things. That way, you trying to access the database will work. And then the other is, oh no, we're going to restrict everything except for this one and this one. And then you may not understand that you've actually restricted a bunch of good things. So when you go out to work someday and you're like trying to hit a website and it's legitimate and you're like, maybe the website's down and you keep trying and then you finally figure out, oh, there are firewalls blocking this site that I need to get to that is perfectly right to get to. Their firewalls being overly restrictive. And that's very common to have happen. Okay, so how rules work? Their logic, like I said, it's like a flow chart that controls how the firewall is going to behave. Do they allow this traffic? Do they deny or this traffic? And then the fancier ones, let's limit this traffic based on the criteria above. So we're going to allow it, deny it, or we can actually limit that traffic. They give you an example here, and this is a good example. Let's block inbound TCP port 3389. What does that mean? It means remote desktop, which is a way to control a computer. You basically can hit that computer, type a login, and now you control that computer. It's there for IT to fix things, but it is available in Windows. So by default, you want this blocked. But specifically blocking it would mean that nothing coming from the internet would be able to pass through on this port. Now, of course, that leads us to what are these? What are these port numbers? Okay, so we know about IP addresses. This address is particular to you. You have to have an IP4 address, but you'll probably also have a 6 address. And then, of course, if you're on your phone, that's got its own way of doing that with the cell network. But your phone will have an IP address when it connects to Wi-Fi. So that can't be duplicated. It's got to be yours and yours alone on that network. And then you have, how do I actually, for instance, get email as opposed to a web page? How do I get a file off my cloud storage as opposed to email or a web page? Those are all defined by protocols. And protocols use port numbers. So we use names like TCP, UDP. We use those kinds of names and we define what that stuff is. Transmission control protocol, user datagram protocol. And we don't need to get into details on those protocols in this class, but we use those terms and then we describe what that means and how it behaves, and that makes sense to us. Well, computers, of course, don't do that. They have to identify things through numbers. And so there's actually a port number assigned to the different kinds of things that you do on the internet. When you're getting your email, that's a certain port number that's used. When you access a web page, that's a certain port number, and on and on and on. And then, of course, rules are, as we already talked about, they're actually proposed and put in place according to the direction of traffic. Do I let email in? Do I let email out? That kind of thing is what's happening. So let me pull up. I've got another page here that I would like to have you take a look at. And these are well-known ports. So HTTP, which is what you use for internet web traffic, not internet traffic. You'll see here that we're using HTTPS right there. It says it is. We really don't use HTTP anymore because it's not secure. We use HTTPS and it uses port 443, and that's for secure web traffic. I didn't log in to see this page. I just clicked on the image and it showed me this page. So I don't want you to think that, oh, you got to log into everything. No, that's not really it. It's more about when my machine says, I need to see the picture on this website, then that website says, well, let's set up a secure connection. And there's a negotiation that happens. And now this is secure. That means if anybody's monitoring you, let's say this is going out over Wi-Fi and I'm on an open network, it's a lot harder for them to see what is this, right? They see this encrypted traffic, and that's harder for them to actually say, oh, he's looking at well-known ports. It's not impossible, but most people are not going to go to that length to check it out. This is the way your computer knows what's going on. It knows that Safari here is using HTTPS because it's this port number. And here's a bunch of other ones. And, this is a mail, an older mail one. This is the new mail one we use, I-143. So communications trying to go out, let's say you're going to check your email system. You're going to use this to check it, most likely. So it's going to tag that. It's going to say, I need to talk to such and such IP address, and this is the specific port number I need. I need internet mail from this specific IP. That's going to hit that firewall on the other end. Well, let's talk about your firewall first. So you're at home, it's allowing everything out. That's the default. Just trust you to do what's right on the inside. So it's not really looking and trying to restrict anything. This information hits your firewall router. That firewall goes, oh, I don't have any rules about blocking things from going out, so you can go ahead and go out. Now it travels across the internet and hits their firewall router. And with that IP number and this port number, that firewall goes down its rules and says, oh, yes, I am allowed to send port 25 information to the actual IP address that you stated. This is okay. It's in my rules. I can do this. And it's sent to that server. That server then responds, and that information comes back to you. When it's coming back to you, your firewall router actually looks and says, oh, you're the one that made this request. I see this. I'm linking it up. You requested this information on port 25 going out. Now it's coming back to you. It's the same IP, it's the same port number. I'll go ahead and allow that traffic to come in. And that is the way firewalls typically are set up, even in larger businesses. So even at your house, it's set up pretty much the same way. You request, I need my email. It's okay to go out. There's no rule restricting that. It goes over to them. Incoming stuff is very restricted. So it looks in its list and goes, yes, port 25, this IP port is fine. You can go ahead and talk to that server. The server then responds to you on its end. Again, it's like, well, I don't have any rules about you not doing this, so go ahead. And then your firewall router has actually kept track of the outgoing and the incoming. And it goes, oh, yeah, that's okay to come in. So again, your default setting on your home router is don't allow anything in. Just ignore it all, unless somebody on the inside actually wanted it. So you requested it, and that enabled that to come back in. And that's really the way it works. You load up Chrome or whatever you're using, and it hits google.com with 443, and that's the process. Oh, yeah, you can go ahead and do that. You're on the inside, and I accept that everything you do is awesome. So go ahead and go out. It goes over to Google. Google goes, oh, 443 for that particular IP address. Yes, that's right here. Go ahead and talk. And then that process comes back the other direction. It hits your firewall router, and your firewall goes, oh, yeah, I remember you actually requested that like half a second ago. So, yeah, go ahead. You can come in. That's the way it works. And that's why we use these port numbers. This is how the computers see it. So we can talk about, oh, this is hypertext transport protocol secure, and that's what this page is made out of. We can talk that way, but the computer is going to go, oh, that's port 443. That's how I identify that communication. So that's what this is talking about. It's talking about, okay, we're setting up rules for incoming and outgoing, and you can do both directions, inbound and outbound. So yeah, inside of businesses, they do usually control things more. As a matter of fact, in my example where we're talking about email, when you're actually hitting that firewall and it is specifically saying port 25 to this IP, that's allowed. If you say port 25 to any other IP that's internal, that's not allowed. So on a bigger system, it's going to say port 25 is only good for this IP. So if you don't request that particular IP and port 25 together, you're not getting in. We're going to block every other port 25 request unless it's going to that IP. And your default at your house, again, it's actually tracking those connections back and forth. And that's not as secure as having a inbound restriction saying, no, that 25 has to go to this particular computer. All right, so that's why they're giving you this as an example. I have students and they'll actually say, hey, can I set it up so I can get on my grandma's computer because she doesn't live near me and she has a lot of trouble. And remote desktop, right? They learn about remote desktop. And it's like, okay, remote desktop. Can't I set that up? And I'm like, yeah, but you don't want to do it. And then I explained, yes, you can set it up. You can go into your router and you can say, go ahead and allow this particular port to come in off of the internet. And when you do that, you have to say it goes to this particular IP, right? So that means that if anybody scans that or just tries, they don't even scan it. They're just like, let me see if I can make a connection using RDP, remote desktop protocol, to 3389 port on a bunch of different systems. And I'm basically just spamming a bunch of them. And then yours is going to respond, or I should say grandma's is going to respond, and it's going to say user ID, login. And now that person can pound the user ID and login and get in. So that's why they're giving you this example in particular of, okay, when you learn about remote desktop protocol, you don't turn that on. Use something like Go to My PC or Jump Desktop or something like that if you need that kind of service. All right, so we talked about, whoops, sorry. We talked about inbound, outbound traffic and why that matters. And then we already talked about the default deny and default allow. Default allow is easier, but it can expose more services. So you're just not going to do that. You're going to default deny everything. All right, we talked about that. One thing we did not talk about is UPnP, Universal Plug and Play. Universal Plug and Play can automatically open ports. What? Without the user's awareness or approval. What? Which increases the attack surface. Wow, that's a problem. A firewall may be quietly blocking remote desktop apps from the internet, stopping attacks as users never see, which is true. So again, using that remote desktop, lots of people use that. So that's one of the things that they're going to try to get in on your system. They're going to hit your firewall and say, oh, is that port open? They're going to try that. And you don't know. It doesn't tell you that that's what's happening, but that's what's happening. All right, back to this bigger one. Here's a problem. Let's talk about how this whole system is thwarted. So if we come up to inbound and outbound traffic again, well, if your typical home router is defaultly allow for outbound information and defaultly deny for inbound, then how do I, as a hacker, get around this? Oh, what I do is I trick you. And that's why we see such a problem with it. In other words, you go to a website and it's like, oh, boom, boom, boom. This is very common. Uh, I hate to say it, but IT people are targeted big time because there might be internally on a system inside their business network, and they need a tool on the in like let's clone a hard drive, let's try to recover data from a hard drive, and so they do a search and they start clicking through websites. There's going to be websites that are fraudulent because they know that that's what IT people are doing, and they hit that website and it's like, oh yeah, this is a great hard disk cloner. It's going to be great. Use it. Click here to download. And then when they click there to download, see, they're clicking that. They've said with that click, I'm going out, and the response is allowed back in. Yeah. That's the way web pages work, isn't it? You click things and it works, and you click a link. But that's what you're saying. When you're on a page and you see a picture and you're like, I want to know more about that, and you click that, you have said, because I've already requested this page, I requested it. Whatever the response is, go ahead and allow that back in. And if that clicked response is not actually pulling up a document that you read about, whatever movie star, but instead is fraudulent, well, the information coming in is now bad. It's a Trojan, it's a virus, it's the next web page that's going to cheat you out of information. So when you are dealing with this kind of way of doing things, that's how hackers get around it. They're not going to, be able to get in just by brute forcing or just smashing against your firewall because it's defaultly deny everything, everything. It just cannot do it. They can't do it. So what do we need to do? Well, the biggest thing is I'll go and infest some web pages out here. That way they request the information and it brings the bad stuff back in. That's why you have to be really careful about the websites that you go to. I always tell students, you will never get in trouble on the internet if you stick with main sites. Now, that's not totally true because main sites, big main sites, let's say ESPN.com, they can be hacked. Right? That has happened and still does happen. But when you're saying, "Oh, I want to see the latest on this particular basketball star, blah blah blah, and what is the news about this latest trouble that they're in?" and ESPN comes up and you read that article and you're like, oh, "Okay, I need some more." And you start clicking down through these different things. Hackers know that. So they create a fake site that's going to tell you some stuff about this that they just stole from some other website. And then on the screen is other things you might click on so that they put a Trojan into your system. And that's not all they can do. There's a lot of different stuff they can do, but that's commonly what happens. And that's the biggest way people get infested. They do not have their antivirus up to date. They don't have that running. It's not running at all. Uh, it's 6 months old. And then they click on something like that, and now they get infested. And then 3 days later, their computer's just acting weird, and they're like, I don't know where this came from. And that's where it came from. Now, network and software firewalls. Well, guess what? They behave the same way. So lots of times people will go, oh, okay, well, you got to have a network firewall and you got to have your software firewall, which is the good way to do it. But because they behave the same way, it's not like you've got better protection now, which is one of the weirdest things. You always see that. I mean, the people that do TV shows are just lazy writers. They really are. And they'll be like that. Okay, I'm hacked through the third firewall. I just got to get through this last firewall. What do you think was the last firewall doing something special or different than the one before it? Now, I'm not saying there isn't a use for that. Like if you are working for the Pentagon, you're over there, they're going to have many firewalls, but that's because they need to separate out people on the inside. They don't trust this person to get into this, and that's on the inside. They didn't set up 7 firewalls so that they could keep people out better because it's doing the exact same thing. So let's take a look at why would you have a software firewall uh, as well as your network firewall. Network firewalls, again, they're on your router. The software firewall is part of Windows. there is a better chance that when you get infested with something, that Windows firewall, because it's running on the machine that now this malware is running on, may be able to stop that from happening. And that depends on how it's set up. So take a look at the video that I have on setting up software firewalls, but the Windows firewall is very, very powerful. On a Mac, I will show you that it's not even on. So by default, there's not a firewall on the Mac. It's not actually restricting anything on there. It's relying on the network firewall to do it. So we'll show you how to turn that on as well. All right, so too permissive, attackers may get into things that they shouldn't. This is very easy. This is the easy setup. Too restrictive, the legitimate apps stop working. And again, this is a lot more, it's not a lot more. This is for you working someplace. Your home firewall is the way I described it. You can make it more restrictive. You can go in and do that on one that's nice. So one that you bought for 80 bucks may not be able to do that. But one that's nice, you can go in and add firewall rules to them. Normally, you don't have to. You just need to be careful on where you're browsing to and that you have virus scanning running, right? That's the main thing. So too restrictive at work means I can't access this website even though it's legitimate. Now I got to send a message to IT and say I need to do this, and they'll review it and they'll figure out if you should have access to that, and then they'll let you have access. This creates a whole thing for IT, right? There's a lot involved in that. And then too permissive, they probably are letting things in and out that they shouldn't. So that you really have to try this balanced approach. That's what work needs to do. What do I need to come in? What am I afraid of going out that shouldn't be going out? And then you just set up rules for those things. That's the best way. And then remember, firewalls protect a network firewall, or a single device is a software firewall. That's on your Windows machine. Rules are IP ports with what port are you using, and that port number is tied to a protocol. So again, this is port 443. The protocol is HTTPS, and that's like the name that we use, right? And then the rule depends on the direction. Do I allow 443 out? Do I allow 443 in? Do I allow it for specific IPs, for all IPs? Communications in general, inbound is riskier than outbound for many home users. And that's why inbound is all blocked, outbound is all open, because they don't want you to have to sit there and set up firewall rules. And that's what you'd have to do if you started blocking outbound. And inbound, that's just way too risky to say, oh, well, let's leave these ports open. That's not good. Default deny gives stronger protection. So that's just like a rule of thumb you should know. Default deny, if I had this firewall router and I plugged it into the internet and said go, I would want default deny on, because immediately it's going to get hacked. Home routers usually block unsolicited inbound traffic. And that again is coming back to, what is solicited traffic? Oh, that's when you click on something. That's when you request google.com. That's when you request gmail.com, and then you start the login process. So that is solicited traffic. Unsolicited means you didn't ask for it. It's just trying to come in. UPnP can open ports automatically and increase the risk. And so there's two topics with this. There's actually a UPnP that helps you do setup and things. You can turn that off. But you need to remember that when you're hitting a website and you click on something, that could be allowing that traffic back in. And then a good firewall uses balance as a protection with usability. Now, there's one thing that I didn't mention on this, and I really didn't want it to be part of a test, and that's why I didn't mention it. But as we learned in the other units, you need to do updates, and your routers, the firewalls, need updates. A lot of times what people do, we get in this in the Wi-Fi section, but a lot of times people just set it up and they leave it and they don't ever mess with it. These days, the automatic setup will automatically update your router. So every so often it updates the router. Um, in past router situations, that didn't happen, and you actually have to tell it, I want you to update or check for updates every week. Updates on routers, firewalls are not massively common, but if you've paid any attention to hacks that happen, they'll tell you this many routers are open to this zero-day attack, and it's all these ASUS routers or TP-Link or Linksys. What they're trying to tell you is if you have one of those routers, you need to have an update to patch that. So just like your Windows machine, just like your iPhone or your Android device, whatever, you have to do updates, and routers need their router firewalls need their updates as well. All right, so that's the information on this particular unit. Please take a look at the other stuff that I look at in the other videos. And once again, thanks for watching.